Now look, I'd dearly love to spend lots of time sharing with you the absolute beauty and glory and majesty of the experience of the Bentley blockade, but there certainly wouldn't be enough time for that. We could sort of spend a whole day on that because it was an incredible experience. Enough, I suppose, to say that to me the one thing that was so amazing about it, that marked it out from so many other campaigns I've been involved in and that other people have been involved in, is just for once we weren't the minority. You know, just for once we were the entire mainstream community. We were the farmers, the nurses, the teachers, and we were even the police. You start to know that your campaign has gone mainstream when the police are not exactly your enemy. Because of their official role, of course, they can't be your friend, but the way we engaged with them, the way they recognised very early on that they weren't just dealing with a minority bunch of activists, but the whole of their regional community, really set the tone, and set the tone in the way they ultimately briefed the state government to tell them that you really don't want to do this. And so it was absolutely fascinating. There's a million stories we could have about what went into that engagement, but I sort of don't necessarily have time for that. What I really want to do is cut to some big picture issues, partly in honour of the whole weekend that's been here and the big things we're looking at, and really try to touch that. Let me tell you, I see myself fundamentally as a pro-democracy activist, and I think one of the great powerful things we probably need in Australia is a pro-democracy movement, partly because people don't think we need one, because they think we are a democracy. I'll let you into something. I don't think in binaries or dichotomies. I don't think the fact that we are a democracy doesn't also mean that we're not sliding into dictatorship. We can do the same thing simultaneously. We are. We're somewhere between early onset fascism and slippery slope fascism at the moment. The kinds of things we're seeing from this reactionary government, the terrible things we're seeing in Tasmania in terms of the forests and the laws about protesting, the protesting laws we've seen in Victoria, what we're seeing with Campbell Newman in Queensland is just straight fascism. So we've got a democracy crisis in Australia, and perhaps part of our democracy crisis comes from the fact that we've been lulled into thinking for so long that representative democracy is kind of coextensive with democracy. I like to say, as far as I'm concerned, there's three main layers of democracy. And representative democracy, our parliaments and parliamentary processes, is quite an important one because it's a very practical way of dealing with a large polity like 20 million people. It is very important, but it can't work on its own. It can't work without being coupled with a vibrant participatory democracy in which people are members of unions, members of political parties, actually attending protests, actually being involved in a healthy media, all the rights of protest, your democratic rights, all of those things are, there's your representative democracy, there's your participatory democracy. But your third and final layer of democracy is, without a doubt, non-violent direct action and civil disobedience, because when you really think about it, that's how we got democracy. That's how the suffragettes got the vote. That's how we got here in the first place. And a lot of talk yesterday about violence and non-violence. I sort of believe that non-violence is important because non-violence is democratic. When you impose your view on people through violence, you're inherently not doing it democratically. And if you can achieve change non-violently, it tends to be lasting. If you achieve it violently, you're really only asking for the backlash to come back and it will be shifted. So, non-violent direct action and non-violent civil disobedience is the absolute, it's our bottom line. And when our democracy is under threat, that is where we stand. And that is the only place that we can stand. And so that's very, very important. And that's what the Northern Rivers came to realise with Bentley. I want to sort of take you on a bit of a journey that's a fairly big picture journey that reflects where I'm really coming from and where some of the strategic thinkers behind Lock the Gate and the coal and gas movement generally are coming from. It seems very abstract at first, but it's actually a very, very grounded and very practical thing. Basically, I call it non-linear change. If you're really into it, it does have its basis in complexity theory and ecology, but I really don't want to go there. But I really want to talk about non-linear change. What's really good about it is it liberates us from this whole calculation about are we winning, are we losing, are things getting better, are things getting worse. Only if you had a linear trajectory that was singular would you even be able to ask those questions or answer those questions. It is impossible to know that because history is so absolutely complex, so absolutely constant, and there is no end point to history. There's no point anywhere in terms of any issue where you can sit down and say, really, is it getting better, is it getting worse, are we winning, are we not winning? Imagine that as an activist, as a political person, you may incarnate in 1600, you may incarnate in 1850, or you may incarnate in 2014. And what would you do in any situation? You would land in that present moment, you would take stock of what the political reality was around you, you'd consult your values, and then you'd ask, what are the most resourceful things I can do in this current situation to bring about useful social change informed by my values? Okay? That is what nonlinear change is really about. Instead of sort of trying to get some sense of some continuum that you understand, that you can design some kind of future-oriented programmatic change program out of. So one of the things that gets you to is sort of give up on the idea of victory and loss, and the idea of is it getting better or is it getting worse, and wringing your hands about that, and what do we need to do in order to get to victory, because I think a lot of those things are misleading us. Learn that, and this is part of your empowerment and your sustainability as an activist, you can be an activist for your entire life. In fact, there's really nothing else all that useful to be. Because the struggle is eternal, okay? The fascists are never going to go away. They've never not been there in history, and they're never not going to be there in the future, okay? The anarchists have never not been there, and they're never going to not be there. We're all going to be here on this stage, and we're all going to be struggling with each other in this ever-changing circumstance forever. So it's not really going to go away. So this is part of where I'm trying to get us to with this sort of non-linear idea. So it's actually very, very liberating, and it's actually quite grounding. So the change is eternal, and the struggle is eternal, and we need to learn to live on that road, because that's the unfolding history that we're in. One of the things we've been encouraged to do over the years, and particularly on the left, is to imagine change as linear and as programmatic. And at the risk of offending some of us in the Greens or socialists, classic representations of linear change are the idea of first we'll raise the consciousness of the proletariat, then we'll have the workers' revolution, then we'll have the dictatorship of the proletariat, and then we'll achieve utopia. Or, you know, what will we do after the revolution? Now, there's two problems with what will we do after the revolution. One is that before you get to your revolution, something's going to sideswipe you. Not necessarily your opponent, just sheer ordinary chaos of life. The future's not going to be quite like you predicted anyway, and that's going to upset your program. Secondly, whenever we sit down and go, what are we going to do after the revolution? We all start disagreeing. Now let's do a quick one. How many people here are appalled by cruelty to animals? How many? Hands up. We've got almost everybody, right? How many? Okay, so therefore, how many people want the outcome of a completely vegan Australia? Oh dear, look. Oh dear, you know, we don't all agree suddenly. What I'm talking about here is something absolutely fundamental to powerful mobilising, is about the difference between values and outcomes. When we mobilise around values, we all agree, okay? As soon as we start an outcomes conversation in the early part of a campaign, we immediately disagree. Now, the reason why the left has been so divided, Judean People's Front, the People's Front of Judea concept, is very much about this idea that we start talking about outcomes in our first meeting. And the reason why we talk about outcomes in our first meeting is because we're a little bit addicted to linear concepts of change, linear concepts of history, and programmatic ideas of change. So we go, well, we can't have a campaign unless we work out what our final ask is. Well, who the hell's asking, all right? Until such time as you've built such a fomented, huge, vibrant social movement based on values that the powers that be are saying, what the hell do we need to do to make you people stop? Then nobody's asking you for an outcome. Now, it does come at times that you are asked for an outcome. You know, after 10 years of revolution in the forests, Anifa was asked to sign off on a forest package, and then you sign off, and when you sign off, half your movement will go, you bastards, you didn't get it right. But at least you've already won by then. But let's really try not to have these outcome conversations in the early part of campaigns. Let's pull ourselves together on values. So that's fundamental to me, to mobilising, and to, you know, the spirit of Bentley and what worked there. Values unite, outcomes divide. What the people of the Northern Rivers combined on was a vision of a gas-filled free Northern Rivers. Not how we're going to get there, which politician's going to do it, whether we're going to cancel licences, you know. We just want to live in a gas, we just want our home to be gas-filled free. So values is very, very important. So if I, so that I think is one of the really big things. And if we want to really sort of see how we can move forward, and it's an optimistic idea, you know, that the way we can really mobilise ourselves outside parliaments, in the community and so on, is if we really keep on this idea of values, and framing is an essential part of this too, and we have to be clever with our frames. For example, the frame of marriage equality is so far a powerful frame because it attaches to values that people already hold. People already like marriage and they already like equality. If you called it gay rights, you'd get some people, but other people, they wouldn't find that one in themselves so easily. That's a classic example of, I think, a campaign that's brilliantly framed. The other thing we need to think about when we're thinking about history and change and whether it's linear and so on, as we've all said today, we are needing major change. We're needing fundamental shifts. When you think about it, do fundamental shifts occur because you sit down with a program and you do this and then you do that and you do something else? Actually, fundamental shifts happen really, really abruptly. They happen really suddenly. The fall of the Soviet Union, the sudden consensus for medicinal cannabis in Australia, you know, there's lots and lots of examples. You know, you find these examples. All of a sudden, the state government going, no, we don't want to do Bentley. These things happen all of a sudden, but they don't happen because of the last thing that happened. They happen because essentially an unbearable pressure has built up on the target. If I could sort of get, because I've only got a little bit of time left, the strategic power of sort of non-linear change strategies is the idea that what you do is you stop obsessing with your own program and your outcomes, which are just things you're going to argue with about your own crew anyway, and you turn your eyes onto the target. And one of the things that's really in favour of change agents, if we can just get it right, is understanding that throughout this universe, change is constant and entropy is constant, and the most vulnerable thing you could ever be is the status quo. If your job is to protect the status quo, the force is against you, okay? And as change agents, if we can get ourselves so flexible, so in the present, and so opportunistic and strategic that we can say, right, that's our target, it's facing entropy. What we're going to do is, informed by our values, we're going to identify what opportunities there are to nudge and to amplify what I call the system effects, the entropic forces, the chaotic forces that are making life hard for our target. The force is with you. It's already with you. Now, the coal campaign is doing this absolutely brilliantly, I think. You know, if you look at the coal campaign, it's saying the coal industry is the target. What are all the things working against it? How can we're not going to push it uphill. What we're going to do is we're going to identify where we can jump on board with any of the things that are hurting the coal industry. And let me tell you something scary about capitalism. The reason why it has been so resilient, and I discovered this when I looked at complexity theory, is that it is actually a very clever, complex, adaptive system, and it's continued to adapt and respond to us. And we have to stop being so clunky with our programs and get very adaptive ourselves. I've actually come to think that capitalism will probably continue, but what we need to change is the algorithms it lives on. The algorithms like constant growth. If we could tweak those away, we may be able to allow it to stumble on, but that will upset some people. But that's partly because we might not be able to get rid of it anyway. Okay, so finishing up there, sort of summing that stuff up, I think the really sort of, you know, the big things are, with non-linear change, get right in the present. Get right in the present, look at the situation exactly as it is, work out what are the resourceful ways you can bring about change. In mobilising the public, mobilise very, very much through values. It's the value-based frame that'll draw support towards you and towards you and towards you, and get, you know, and discover values people already have. You know, you don't want to try to create new values for people. People already like democracy, they already like equality, they already like fairness. They already like sustainability, so we can work with those values and base yourselves very much on those, and remember that you're not going to be able to control the moment the shift happens. The shift happens when the forces build up enough, and you're just building those forces.